Major breaking news. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has just released the rules associated with the promised restoration of Second Amendment rights to non-violent felons. Specifically, the United States Department of Justice has just published its proposed rules to grant relief to certain individuals who are otherwise precluded from possessing firearms under federal gun control law, 18 U.S.C. 922G. We're going to break down this huge news, which I predicted several months ago, and here it is when we come right back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Box of Don, a proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. All right, this is fantastic, huge news. Friday afternoon, Attorney General Pam Bondi has just released proposed rules with a statement as to how they intend to restore the Second Amendment rights of likely millions of Americans. They're going to do this administratively, which is what I explained was going to happen when they decided, meaning the administration decided not to seek cert in that Third Circuit ruling of Brian Range versus the United States versus Merrick Garland. As you may recall, under federal law, there's a list of prohibited people that are not allowed to possess firearms. That is listed in federal gun control law 18 U.S.C. 922G. However, there has been a series of litigations that have been ongoing challenging whether or not the so-called Martha Stewart issue, which is nonviolent people who have been convicted of quote-unquote felonies as defined by federal law, whether or not they can be disarmed for the rest of their lives, consistent with the Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms. There have been some major victories which I've covered on this channel. For example, in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals out of New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, in a powerful decision written by Judge Thomas Hardiman, the chief judge there, en banc decision by the Third Circuit in the case of Brian Range versus Merrick Garland. They explained that there are instances where nonviolent felons cannot be disarmed for the rest of their lives, consistent with the Second Amendment. This is also consistent with the Supreme Court precedent, which I explained to you at the time, and a lot of people said, no, Mark, you're wrong. I said, no, you're wrong. And that is that the United States Supreme Court decision in the Rahimi case in 2024 was actually good for the Second Amendment, because in addition to reaffirming the Bruin methodology, it also reaffirmed the notion that the only way you can be disarmed for life, or disarmed I should say, is if you are found to be a violent danger to others. You are found to have been a violent danger to others by a court after a process. And even under those circumstances, you can only be disarmed temporarily. That was what the Rahimi case said. A lot of people were upset with me, and I said, nope, you watch. It's all going to work out. And it has just worked out right here, right now, because Attorney General Pam Bondi has just used the Rahimi precedent and the Third Circuit precedent and Range to issue these rules where they basically indicate they're going to restore the rights of likely millions of Americans who are otherwise not able to possess firearms, and they're going to restore this right through this administrative process. But before we get into the details of how that process might work, I just want to give you the statements by the Trump administration as to why they decide to go down this path. Let's start with this summary of what just occurred here. President Trump directed the Department of Justice to address the ongoing infringements of the Second Amendment rights of our citizens, all of them. Federal law disables the firearm rights of many citizens who have been convicted of crimes without regard to whether they actually pose a threat of violence. But federal law also empowers the Attorney General to restore Second Amendment rights to individuals who are not likely to act in a manner dangerous to the public safety. Today, the Department of Justice submitted to the Office of the Federal Register a proposed rule regarding the exercise of the Attorney General's authority under federal law to grant relief to individuals who are otherwise precluded from possessing firearms. You hear those key words? These are key words that you've heard on this channel for well over a year now. You can only be disarmed if you're violent, physically violent, and if you're dangerous to perhaps yourself or to others. Violence, dangerousness. Not irresponsible, not we don't like you, not you used hate speech. No, violent and dangerousness. Period, full stop. That is what this administration is focused on. They want to take the guns away from violent and dangerous people, and not people like Brian Range, who was convicted of sort of a food stamp fraud 3 decades ago, and under federal law, because it was defined as a felony, he was disarmed for life. That's simply absurd. And as you know, there's a process under federal law to restore people's rights. But the games that got played since 1992, both by the Republicans in the House and the Senate and the Democrats, is they refused to fund the ATF specifically for the purpose of restoring rights. But Pam Bondi specifically took it upon herself, and you have to give her credit for this. She took the authority to restore rights away from the ATF and gave it to herself in the Department of Justice generally. Because that congressional provision in all the budgets since 1992 prohibited the ATF from spending money to restore the Second Amendment rights of anyone. But that rider by the Congress has not or does not apply generally to the DOJ. In other words, the Attorney General can give away or can restore rights even though the ATF cannot under those budgetary riders. Now, let's go on and see what the Department of Justice next said about this proposed new set of rules and the restoration of rights of potentially upwards of millions of Americans. For too long, countless Americans with criminal histories have been permanently disenfranchised from exercising the right to keep and bear arms, a right every bit as constitutionally enshrined as the right to vote, the right to free speech, and the right to free exercise of religion, irrespective of whether they actually pose a threat. No longer. This is what Attorney General Pam Bondi had to say. That's powerful language by Attorney General Pam Bondi. I know a lot of people said we don't like Pam Bondi because of mistakes she allegedly made in Florida, and I understand that. But as I've explained to you before, folks, Ronald Reagan, as the governor of California, raised taxes. He understood he made a mistake, became the president of the United States, and knew what to do to turn around the economy. There may have been mistakes. As the Attorney General of Florida, Pam Bondi may or may not have made such mistakes dealing with red flags and the like after the Parkland school shooting, but that's okay because Pam Bondi and Donald Trump and this administration is, as I predicted before the election, the most pro-Second Amendment administration in American history. That's it. The Trump administration with Harvey Dillon, Jason Mannion, Rob Leiter at ATF, Pam Bondi, and so on, is the most pro-Second Amendment administration in American history, and this is further proof of it. Now, here is exactly how they expect this process is going to work, at least in a general matter. We'll break it down in more details in future videos, but here is how they envision this administrative restoration of rights to occur to avoid having to go to court, for example. The proposed rule will provide citizens whose firearm rights are currently under legal disability with an avenue to restore those rights, while keeping firearms out of the hands of dangerous criminals and illegal aliens. Ultimate discretion to grant relief will remain with the Attorney General, and she will exercise that discretion on a case-by-case basis in light of all available facts and evidence that bear on an individual's application. But absent extraordinary circumstances, violent felons, registered sex offenders, and illegal aliens in particular will remain presumptively ineligible for relief. So you see that, folks? It's focused on illegal, violent conduct, sex offenders, violent people, and of course illegal aliens who don't even have Second Amendment rights. All of these people are prohibited from having guns under 18 U.S.C. 922G, and that is almost certainly going to continue absent extraordinary circumstances. Now, with that said, there's a lot of people like Martha Stewart who was convicted of a felony for lying to the FBI and lost her gun rights for life. That's simply absurd. That's simply absurd. You don't lose your right to practice your religion or to go to church or exercise your free speech rights or start a media company because you committed a felony at some point. That's not how the game works. And I'm happy to see that Attorney General Pam Bondi and Donald Trump are stepping up to the plate as I predicted and as they indicated several months ago, and we're seeing the fruits of their labor right now. And here is what U.S. Pardon Attorney Ed Martin had to say about this new proposed rule. General Bondi's support of the rebooted 925C program is consistent with President Donald J. Trump's promise to the American people to support the beautiful Second Amendment. My team and I are developing a 925C program landing page with a sophisticated, user-friendly platform for Americans petitioning for their right or the return of their gun rights, which will make the process easier for them. And this is fantastic news, folks. There's no other way to put it. Now, I want to remind you one thing. I predicted this on the channel, and now I think you're seeing it come true. When the Third Circuit Court of Appeals issued that powerful en banc ruling in favor of the Second Amendment, it was like 13-2 or something like that, saying that Brian Range could not be disarmed for the rest of his life for a 30-year-old food stamp crime, which maybe he didn't even commit. And the Attorney General's office under Pam Bondi and the Solicitor General John Sauer made a decision, and this is key, made a decision not to seek cert from the U.S. Supreme Court, even though that Third Circuit decision cut back on the scope of a federal statute. So usually you would see, in whether it be a Republican or Democratic administration, they would seek cert. In this case, the Solicitor General for Donald Trump, John Sauer, chose not to do that. And when that happened, I indicated on this channel that that was a clear sign from this administration that they were going to try to restore the rights of millions of Americans using the administrative process of the Department of Justice rather than fighting out these cases one by one in court. And that is what's going on here as I see it. That rather than get into a big theoretical fight in the court system, the Trump administration is going to set up an administrative process online where people can submit materials and say, I lost my gun rights because of these crimes, but I am not a danger to anybody. Either the original crime had nothing to do with violent or dangerousness. It was like a fraud. It was a white collar. It was whatever it was. It's not good. I'm sorry I did it, but it has nothing to do with violence. And there's nothing in my past that indicates I'm violent in any respect or a danger to myself or a danger to others. And that process, I think, will give rise to essentially de facto pardons or the restoration of rights when it comes to the Second Amendment by Ed Martin's pardon office. But again, as to how they play out, we will see for sure. There's a 45 pages of rules set forth here that I'll cover in a future video. But for now, you just need to know, and I'll put a link to that, to the rules, the proposed rules in the description of this video. But for now, you just need to know that the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi has published these proposed rules to grant relief to those individuals precluded from possessing firearms. And this is, again, a major step forward to restoring the rights of millions of Americans who have been deprived of their rights under federal gun control law, and wrongly so in many instances. Okay, there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed today's breaking news. Make sure you follow me on X at @4boxdown. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and to Rumble, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.